Just a little bit of news, what Tim was saying about Nick Clegg. I think the Liberal Democrats will be pretty glad if Nick Clegg does stay in Sheffield Current. Pretty much, I go around and talk to Lib Dem activists and people on the ground, and they say to you, and I say, well, where's Nick Clegg in the campaign? Oh, he's on our leaflets, and then basically, he's on page 4, page 3, whilst last time round he was right at the fulcrum of it. Okay, today I'm going to talk about the Liberal Democrats, and really I think from some of these images, whether they really can keep their seats. So the first few slides are just going to do a much more generic overview of the narrative where we are with the Lib Dems, and then we're going to sort of talk about this debate that academics are really having about, can we believe the polling figures? And I think the Lib Dems are having this themselves. Can we believe the polling figures, or are they going to actually do very well where they have popular incumbents, where they have a strong local platform? It might surprise you that yes, there are places where they still have a strong local platform, and I'll show you them. And also, of course, their bastion of local campaigning, which is critical to them. I think the first point I want to make is that regarding the Liberal Democrats, when the sun shone, they didn't reap the benefits. In 2005, they should have got 80, 90 seats. They got 62. Last time around, I agree with Nick. They lost 5 seats. The percentage share of the vote went up by 1%, but generally the Lib Dems have underperformed, and we have to put that into some kind of context. One of the reasons that is because since '92 they've really changed their strategy. For a brief while, it was targeting key seats, putting a lot of effort into key seats, building up a strong base. And then, after 2001, it was actually broadening their strategy, trying to go into areas where they were second to Labour, both in the north and in the south, second to the Conservatives, and then hopefully they would reap the benefits. But they haven't done that. And now, they're back to where they were. So this campaign is really about defence. It's around about, looking, I think, one of the things I'll talk about is who votes for the Liberal Democrats, what the key conditions for it, and how the 2015 election has sort of really affected this. So just to go very quickly through the first couple of slides, and then really it's been a dire 5 years for the Liberal Democrats. They've lost more than 1,300 councillor seats, so their local platform, you would think, has been pretty much destroyed. They rely on very heavily. They've done appallingly badly in the MEP election, European elections. The by-election kings, bar Eastleigh, where they managed to scrape through mainly on postal votes, but they managed to get out their core vote for the postal votes, and pretty much through inept UKIP campaigning, managed to squeeze that, and they did very well in Oldham East and Saddleworth right at the start of the 5 years. But ever since that, they've lost 11 out of 19 by-elections. They've lost their deposits, which, if you think about the Lib Dems historically, it's quite a staggering statistic. And of course, they've done pretty badly in devolved elections. And in terms of their polling, everybody pretty much knows what happened. They went into coalition. It went down a bit, and then they said they were not going to put in tuition fees, and then basically it's been pretty bad since then. 10% by about 2010 to 2010. We're seeing them now stabilise around about 8%. What's coming out on the local campaign, I'll talk a lot about the local campaign because I have quite a lot of knowledge of that inside of what's going on. It's a lot of that is the squeezing of the Green vote in particular areas, and we're seeing that. And as Jane and Tim mentioned, leaders, they're all pretty unpopular, but Clegg's the least popular of the unpopular leaders. So when we think about the Liberal Democrats, what I would say is, essentially, since 2001, in some ways they've tried to position themselves, so they've gone out the old classic median voter argument and tried to position themselves a little bit towards the left. In some ways it's quite a good strategy in some places, but arguably not in others, and that has actually had an effect on them. But critically, it's important to realise about their low social partisan base. So why do we get hundreds and hundreds of leaflets from the Liberal Democrats throughout the 5 years in their target areas? Because they have a low social base, and they believe if we keep whacking you with leaflets, you remember us locally as being really important. So it's a key element of that. So them losing councillors, you know, through the electoral cycle is a pretty key thing. But historically, of course, they've been a party of protest, and now they're not. That's gone. One of the ways in which they connect to people has been, you know, Kennedy. If you look at all the likability things of Kennedy, maybe not necessarily competent, but certainly likability, and certainly with Clegg, you know, the party leader provides a key element of drawing voters in. And then in your local area, a key element also is whether the Liberal Democrats can actually win the seats. And part of that comes down to the thing that's not gone, and that is the idea of the local. And we're moving back towards, you know, 97, 2001, even 1992 to the argument that the Liberal Democrat campaign is about three things this time around. It's the popularity of the incumbent, it's about their local base, which is integrated within that because their local base where they have people to go around and do a lot of personal contact, which is the big buzzword of the campaign for all parties, post-Obama 2012, and the local campaign, which year after year, if you measure the campaign at the local level, which is the party that reaps the most benefits, it's the Liberal Democrats. However, there's this big debate, perhaps amongst you lot, but also amongst the media, about the argument really of, you know, here's their national polling, they're doing pretty badly, and, you know, can they really survive locally? So we've had the Liberal Democrats doing their own polling, which we'll probably discuss the validity of that later on, but we also had the excellent Steve Fisher produce some stuff from the BES just at the turn of the year. I think it was about November 2014. And I thought it's worth setting this up as a straw man, really, in the context of saying, you know, when there was quite a lot of prior strength from the BES, you know, they're going to do actually much worse, the Liberal Democrats. And this argument, you know, that there's the local popularity of the incumbent isn't really going to come through. To be fair to him, I think there's a lot to say. I've had a look at the data myself, and it's as one would expect from him, it's very robust. But of course, as we get closer to the campaign, a couple of things I would say. Firstly, you get floor effects because we've got about 120 seats where the Liberal Democrats are polling around 12% last time, or got about 12% or less in the vote. And then you've got issues with, you know, the tactical squeeze that is likely to come on, which is coming on now, and of course, you know, generally the efforts are locally. So I guess, you know, if we were to take this point, which is certainly valid, and my good friend and colleague Ed Fieldhouse presented something where from the BES data, we said that the Liberal Dems would only win one seat recently. In a way, I would say you've got to have a look at the local incumbency effect. So let's have a look at some of the work that's been done. Some of the work's been done with me and Ed, actually, on incumbency effects for electoral advantage, but also by Tim West in Nottingham. And both of us generally find that when we look at electoral advantage, incumbency advantage, the Liberal Democrats are much more candidate-based as opposed to the other main parties where there's actual fusing of the candidate and the party. So they reap much better rewards. Well, what's the sort of headline figure? Well, I would say from the analysis that we've done, around about 8% reflecting our personal vote. Of course, it can vary, and there are certain effects that are better. They come out certainly for candidates that certainly have not been in there for that long. This time round, we've got 11 retired or resigned Liberal Democrats, so in certain seats, that's going to be a huge problem for them. So in the seat where I'm at university is Bath, and others around there, Taunton, also areas where, quite frankly, if the Liberal Democrat incumbent stood, there was no question that they would win, now are pretty vulnerable. And Bath, even with quite a large majority, I can tell you from being on all sides of the campaign, and looking at some of the data there is quite close. And then you get first-time MPs. Historically, we would see a big shift for the Liberal Democrats. They get a large boost from first-time incumbents. So they've got 11 first-time incumbents this time round. So the question mark is, will that actually hold for this election? Will they get that boost on the ground for their regarding that personal vote? It could certainly make a difference. Yeah. The second bit I would like to, is a bit clustered, but I'll try and go through it. The second bit I'd like to talk about is the local platform. Earlier I said that they've lost around about 1,300 councillors, which are important for their local base, but there's still around about 18 seats if you take out Highlands and Cornwall, where you have quite a lot of independents. 18 seats where they have quite a considerable local base. That means councillors are going around, knocking on doors, leafleting, targeting letters, way before the regulated period of December the 18th, 1-2 years in advance, okay, to keep up their base core support. So the argument that, that it's actually, they've been completely wiped off, it's not necessarily the case. The other thing is to differentiate between the seats that are against the Conservatives, in terms of the parliamentary election coming up, and those seats against Labour. Basically, the headline figure is in the seats where they're fighting Labour, they've lost half of their councillors. In the seats where they're fighting the Conservatives, they've lost a fifth of their councillors. And there are places where they've actually gained seats, believe it or not. So you've got places like Bath and Cheltenham, that haven't seen a large decrease in their seats. So what I'm saying there is, yes, the Lib Dems have really suffered, but where it matters, in the actual, where they're up against the Conservatives and against Labour in their stronghold seats, or the seats that they hold, maybe they're going to pull up a little bit better of a fight. Simple graph here, and we can do this on any election. We can do this for what we call a short campaign, which is about to start, or the long campaign. Generally speaking, and again, a little bit of an unknown, but for this time round, what we do know that in terms of not only vote share, but in vote change, that the Liberal Democrats do, where they campaign very intensively, they do far, far better. And the platform and the idea of the popular incumbent and the campaign together could see them actually do a little bit better than suggested. So in terms of their national campaign, obviously very strongly defensive. So they're focusing very much on the seats that they hold. There are a few seats around the edges that I think they've pretty much given up on. So, and they are flirting with the odd games. Montgomeryshire at the moment has been completely carpet bombed with leaflets and activists. They're desperate to win that back. I'm pretty sceptical there, and I think they might have trouble getting on to Brecon actually, more than Montgomeryshire. Watford is an interesting seat. They've obviously put a lot of effort in there because their candidate is the mayor, or the former mayor, so she's certainly got some level of local popularity. So it's worth taking keeping an eye on that seat. The other ones that they're flirting with is Ashfield, which at the moment is they've put in about 3 years worth of campaigning in there, so difficult to see that they can turn it around. But Ashfield and Oxford West are the others pretty much. In terms of their internal polling, so they've done 2 real big internal polls. One was ranging from the late end of 2013 to July 2014, and of course they've done these recent ones with Salvation. But out of that internal polling, which wasn't actually good reading for them, the first lot, what they decided that they will do is focus nationally in terms of direct mail, etc., on younger women of 18 to 34, because they were the group that was very undecided, in their droves, moved away from the Liberal Democrats. I would note that that group is also the group that doesn't actually turn out that much, so I'm not sure of the real strategy there, but certainly nationally speaking, there's quite a strong emphasis on that in the key seats. Core messages, well, Obviously, they try and promote this, we fit in the middle between, Labour borrow too much, Conservatives will cut taxes, and they try and get their successes. People premium is one of the common ones, but simply they've just been outshone by the Conservatives. They've been outshone by the Conservatives in that they've been shown up really in terms of getting messages across. They found it very, very difficult nationally, and even if you look at a lot of the polling evidence, it suggests that most of the successes, I saw one recently about tax threshold, only 19% of people actually in the survey correctly identified it as a Lib Dem policy. So you have that problem as well. So how do they really combat that? Well, they've gone back to the local again, and what they're trying to do is to basically play the national message at a local level. So if I'm in Bath, what they're going is, the pupil premium in Bath managed to affect this amount of people. The increase in the tax threshold has affected this amount of people. So it's about a national message to the local situation. Okay, so that's pretty much key. Essentially, like all of the three parties, I would say, they're very much influenced by the Obama campaign. And essentially, for 18 months now, they've really been getting involved in this very much what they call a slow canvassing, which is this idea of very much personal contact on the ground. It's in their real target areas, and it's to build up and maintain popularity, not only of the incumbent, but the incoming candidate where they have been selected. Interestingly, on that note, quite a few of the Lib Dem seats were, like Bath, for instance, and Fife, they left it a little bit late in terms of getting their candidate. Well, that was a deliberate strategy, so they didn't get the best opponents. They felt that was a part of a way in which they could get a weaker opponent and they could attack that opponent. So don't read too much into the idea of, that these things are quite well thought out in Lib Dem hierarchy. The other thing I would note is this use of Connect. Now, Tim mentioned, and a few of us mentioned, the idea of the Conservative campaign. The Conservative campaign on the ground, so it uses software called Merlin at the moment, which is absolutely abysmal. In fact, lots of the Conservatives have gone back to using the old software. Now, this could be absolutely critical at the end of the day. What I'm saying here, we've got a very unpredictable election, so really it could come down to the way in which you work on the ground, how these seats will swing. Labour uses Nation Builder, but it also uses geodemographic classification. They're using Connect, which is they painted it off the Obama campaign, and it is extremely effective in linking up between the national and local. It basically can mean that the national campaign daily, throughout the day, can actually influence, the local campaign. So we're getting a real sophistication in the Lib Dem ground campaign. 57 mini general elections. So the mantra of the local campaign is: who are the safe voters, who are the stay-at-homes, who are the squeezers, and who are the switchers. Basically, the idea is squeezing the Conservatives in Lib Dem Labour battleground. So where I am in Bath, it's a seat against the Conservative, and the battle is really to squeeze this vote, the anti-Labour vote of Green, UKIP, and Labour, and to make sure that stays with the Liberal Democrats. You go 10 miles up the road in Bristol West, okay, and all of the campaigning is about trying to squeeze the Conservative votes because the Conservatives haven't got any chance. And they're not really touching the Greens there or Labour. It's all about reducing and halving that vote. So it just shows how, on the ground, the Lib Dems remain quite chameleon-like and could certainly influence the strategy. Just quickly want to mention a couple of things that myself would be worried if I was in the Lib Dem strategy. They've got no real way of combating the SNP, and actually, the SNP could seriously hurt the Liberal Democrats. I think if they, 3 or 4 seats, if they manage to hold 3 or 4 seats against the SNP swing, they do pretty well. A number of them are in threat. I think the other interesting thing is UKIP. Okay, and Matt and Rob and others have talked about this before. What we're seeing, if you divide up, the seats where UKIP can have quite a lot of influence, it's actually in the seats where the Lib Dems are fighting the Conservatives, but it's actually the Labour vote in that area. So what we've seen, and what you can actually see from BES evidence, is that in those areas you have old Labour voters who flirted with the Liberal Democrats in 2010 as a protest, but are now going to UKIP. And one of the problems that I'm picking up nationally and locally is that the Lib Dems don't really have a strategy of dealing with UKIP. I mean, one could argue, does anybody have a strategy of dealing with UKIP? But certainly, I would say, is on the ground, they're just leaving them alone. And that's a very, very big problem. If that, and we're talking here, 8-10% in those seats could be that, similar types of people that voted Lib Dems before. So a couple of things I want to say. Clegg's mentioned that we're going to win. We're going to hold on to a lot of our seats. It's very much a rearguard effort, obviously. And it's all about the joined-up campaign. It's much more sophisticated than it's ever been in terms of the local and national campaign. And there's a perception that in many Lib Dem seats, particularly where they're fighting the Conservatives, generally on the ground, if you talk to a lot of the Liberal Democrats, it's a huge number of undecideds, even now. Okay? People that flirted with the Greens are sort of moving back. Some that are maybe thinking, well, I'm going to vote Labour this time, even though they might not have a chance. Where is that going to go? That really makes a lot of difference in 37 of those in those Liberal Democrat seats. And either way, one could put a case for saying that they are the key party in the election, as Tim sort of outlined before. If they hold their seats, that will certainly benefit Labour and may offset some of the Labour Tory losses to Labour. And if they do badly, it could still end up being the Conservatives, which is probable. Okay.